So I guess it all started with Halo 3. Halo 3 was the first-person shooter that I was ever really drawn to, and I think it was because of Slayer as a scenario. A lot of games had some sort of team deathmatch scenario, but I think what made Slayer unique was the Halo 3 sandbox. The guns, grenades, melee, the shields, the sort of you're a super soldier experience, the maps, the sizes and the shapes of the maps, and so I spent a lot of time from I guess like 2008 to 2010 using the map editor, the Forge, and making custom games for Halo 3, and being a part of this community that shared these maps and game types online on Bungie.net and Forge Hub. Looking back, it was probably the first creative community I was ever a part of, and it was really just all thanks to Bungie really just giving you this diet game engine with Halo 3. So then in college, my sweet mates Sam and Spencer watched the Smash documentary. Which is this 4-hour history of competitive Super Smash Bros. Melee. And after watching it, they introduced us all to the techniques and to esports and to the players. And for me, most importantly, they introduced me to the concept of meta, which was sort of the agreed upon best way to play the game at the highest level. And they introduced me to Hungrybox, who was known as one of the 5 gods of Melee, and who played Jigglypuff, which was the character that I'd like to play. And I was drawn to Jigglypuff because, on one hand, she was this hilarious, adorable little balloon Pokemon, and then on the other hand, she had arguably the most powerful move in the game with the Rest, where she falls asleep, and if you do it right, it's very powerful, but if you don't, you're asleep. So Hungrybox sort of defined the meta with how he played Jigglypuff, and a lot of players didn't like it and tried to get Jigglypuff banned, and I really love that he stuck to his guns and became the best despite all of that. And then also just like without me knowing, he found my song Rest and supported it and danced to it on his stream, and has just been great. So thank you so much, Juan. You're the best. And so I was really fascinated by this concept of meta, so I started to look back at Halo because I had never explored Halo as a competitive game. And then for a period of time, I was just fascinated by the meta in first-person shooters in general, and so I would go looking for old esports to watch to see what happened in these games sort of socially. And so I learned about the history. I learned about Unreal Tournament and Quake and Counter-Strike and Overwatch. And then there's this game I stumbled upon called Guns the Duel, which was this 2009, I think, shooter where the best way to play, the meta was to play it, was to break it, was to use bugs and glitches to get the competitive advantage. Similarly to how Melee is played. So that was the first time I ever saw that like really hard at work in a shooter game. And then there was also a period of time after that where I was very interested in this idea of games that never had a meta, and what would the meta be, what would it look like socially for it to exist. So I would start bugging my friends to play 007 Nightfire on an emulator on my laptop as like a party game. That was how I pitched it, but in reality I wanted to see what happened in this system socially, what became the meta. And then in the beginning of 2017 I had an idea for a game. I basically wanted to combine the technical potential and pacing and knockback from Melee with the first-person competitive sandbox that Halo had, and to have this 1v1 arena shooter that was sort of paced like a fighting game. And so I called my friend Dalvin, who had just recently left school to start writing music and doing code for a game called Gollum Gates. And I pitched him my idea, and I said I think I could do it by modding Halo Reach. Like, should I learn to mod Halo Reach, or should I just learn Unreal Engine? And he said, well, if I had that idea, knowing what I do about Unreal Engine, if my goal was to make this 1v1 competitive FPS, he's like, I could do it in about 6 months. And so I was like, all right, that just sounds more sustainable. So early on, Dalvin really just kind of mentored me over the phone, which is a great way to keep in touch, again, because he had just left school, but it was also super helpful because he just helped me design an early movement system and some of the guns, and just over the phone without Unreal in front of him, so just doing the logic in his head. And then I bought this template called Generic Shooter for Unreal Engine that was basically supposed to be everything you needed to build a first-person shooter. And I built a map in that, and I built my guns, and they could shoot at and push around these AI that basically were just programmed to stand there and take damage and die. And I learned a lot through that project, but I definitely had bit off a bit more than I could chew, and could not actually get something testable functioning with it. So I started from scratch in the summer of 2017, and that summer all I did was I made the guns from scratch, and I just made it work over multiplayer. So I learned how to do multiplayer networking in Unreal that summer. And then basically I hit a roadblock where I learned that because I was building it on my MacBook, I wasn't going to be able to set up Steam support. So testing it over anything other than LAN, than one Wi-Fi network, wasn't going to work until I bought a PC. So then I put everything on hold for a while because I was working on an album called Self-Titled, and I was transferring schools, and just a lot of other things were taking precedent. After a semester at Brown, I had another idea that I got pretty excited about, and that was to basically make it a top-down shooter that looked like Pokemon, and to basically make it 2 players, 1 keyboard. I took basically an entire dimension out of my first-person shooter idea so that I could do it on my MacBook. And so I had a 2 players, 1 keyboard game, and then I built LAN multiplayer, and we got up to 2v2, and just tested and iterated. And then after we sort of had a functioning multiplayer, I built a little campaign for it, because I wanted to tell a story. That was definitely something I wanted to do, and now realized that I could in Unreal with what I had built. And then I just sort of started to finish up college, and over the summer of 2019, I did a lot more Pheeno and audio work, and I didn't have the time to make games. And then COVID happened, and so pretty early in lockdown, I was on a phone call with Dalvin. I was asking him about some of his favorite storytelling devices, specifically for video games. And that just kind of got me thinking again about making games and telling stories, and then I had another idea. The idea was basically for this world where the rules of a video game, that your health is 0, you go to your respawn point, you get a kill with a gun, and your stats go up, that was just the laws of physics for the people in this world, for the players. And so in this world, guns function differently. They're used to play these sports, to play team deathmatch and capture the flag, and to earn your stats, and so I had this structure, and I was very fascinated about what happens when you put characters in the structure. How do people exist in this world, and what do they think, and how do they interact with the rules? And so I have this story now that I want to tell, called Coran, that basically came out of what happened when I started putting characters in the world and seeing how they interacted with it and with each other. And the name Coran comes from that conversation that I was having with Dalvin, where he told me about when he was a little kid, he and his friends would go and play in the woods, and they played this game they called Coran, and they basically mostly sat there and built the world and the characters, and instead of actually running around with sticks and like I was doing when I was a kid and acting it out. So to me, the name Coran is really about how exciting it is to just build a world. I started learning how to make an AI, and I wanted to make an AI that was fun for me to fight, and that, because I always liked playing against bots, but they always felt like bots, and so I wanted to make it feel like you were fighting another person. So I made a map, and I iterated on this AI, and it became more fun and challenging for me to fight. And then I taught the AI to pick up ammo on the ground and to fight other AI and prioritize targets. And then I made a bigger map, and then I had a sort of battle royale scenario where you and 5 other AI could play to be the last one alive. And then I made a level 1. I made a map called Four Shores, and I modeled it sort of after the demo that I had made for my top-down shooter. Then I made a dog that could fly, and that was sort of the vehicle to get around the level 1. And then I made multiplayer. I made it so that you could play the game over LAN. Still wasn't really possible to test without huge amounts of lag because I was on a Mac still. And then I just started saving up for a computer. And while I was saving up, I basically made art assets in Blender. And I made levels and concept art and worked on the story and the dialogue, because I couldn't do multiplayer for Steam. And then in January of 2021, I finally bought a PC after 3 years of making games on Unreal in MacBooks, and I started testing Steam with my friends, and I polished up what I had, and I had all this footage of the AI and the level, and me and my friends playing on Steam against each other, and I put that all together, and I wrote some music, and I made a trailer, and now I'm asking for support, and so that's where we are now. And so yeah, so thanks so much for listening to this story, and I hope you enjoyed it, and that you want to play Coran.